Thank you. After the death of Karimov, there are high hopes, expectations, and speculations about what will happen next in Uzbekistan. Mirziyoyev, the current interim president, is expected to win the elections in December. And is Uzbekistan finally heading towards a better future, or will the same kind of regime stay in power? I will try to answer these issues, talk about these issues from the legal perspective. So what needs to be changed in the country? First of all, respect for rule of law and human rights. In the legal sphere and human rights field, the urgent issue needs to be prioritized is to cultivate respect for rule of law. First of all, officials should be acted according to the laws, and they should require other government officials to do so, and who do not follow should be prosecuted properly. And this haven't been the same in the past. And if the laws and internal regulations violate the constitution of the republic or do not meet the international standards of human rights, that they should be amended and changed accordingly. And I want to talk about constitution. We know that from the Soviet time, the constitutions used to be just paper only. And after the independence, same thing happened to the new constitution. This is that the constitution is weak, it's not working in practice, and there have been the constitution of the Uzbekistan was revised 8 times during the 25 years of independence. And one of those same amendments was that Article 96 in the Constitution that states in the case of when the president fails to exercise his or her power, who should take the duties. And the article says that the chairman of the Senate of Oli Majlis should take the duties and power of acting president. And after the death of Karimov was announced, everyone was expecting this should be the case. And Nigmatullayev, the current chairman of the Senate, should step in as the interim president. But that did not happen. Nigmatullayev declined the duties of acting president because he thought he was incapable of. And then he suggested that Prime Minister Mirziyoyev should take the role. So the Senate unanimously approved the decision, and the Prime Minister Mirziyoyev became the interim president. In my opinion, the procedure for the power transition was clearly set in the Constitution. There was no question at all. And it did not follow the Constitution. I think the Constitution was violated one more time. And the important thing is that President is elected, and the representatives of Parliament and Senate are also elected. On the other hand, Prime Minister is appointed and representative of the executive branch. In Mirziyoyev taking power, I think there was no share of people having a voice to elect him. And another thing is, a chairman of the Senate declined the duty, and if he declines, he should have resigned or get fired because it was his duty. And again, we see that he remains in office. The Constitutional Court should have decided what to do in the case of question or ambiguity. And I think the laws do not give an authority to the chairman of the Senate to suggest or decide the case in this situation. And I want to talk about Constitutional Court also. I think one of the reasons for such disregard and violation of Constitution is that constitutional review system in Uzbekistan is very weak and it's almost dead. The Constitutional Court should see the cases where there is uncertainty, ambiguity, or tensions between laws and the Constitution. If we look at the practice of the Constitution during these 25 years, there were only 38 cases were decided until now. And most of those cases are on the not so important topics. There are so many burning issues, questions about some laws or regulations about their constitutionality, but no one took those to the court, or no one took the initiative to think about them. And access to court is also limited, and in practice, most of the cases are brought by the judges of the Constitutional Court. And citizens cannot bring matters directly to Constitutional Court. Again, it serves to limit their relevance. And we can conclude that Constitutional Court is not independent. Appointment and dismissal procedure of judges is also not clear in the legislation. If we go back and look at the history, we can see that in the beginning of the independence, Constitutional Court tried to be independent, expand its power, but then institutional design in the past regime made it passive organ. So now it's time of Mirziyoyev, and recently he issued a decree on legal reforms, and it's a big document. I can summarize in 3 points that it focuses on strengthening the independence of courts, strengthening the guarantees of rights and freedoms of citizens, and increasing the level of fairness and justice in the courts. There are so many new amendments, reforms. For example, it introduces judges to be appointed to life after they serve 2 terms, and some habeas corpus acts, abolishing punishment of jail, decriminalizing some of the criminal acts, and so on. These reforms do sound good, and if they happen in practice, I think it's a big success. And the government would be heading towards a good direction. But my concern is that there is no big attention to defense lawyers, which is institution of advocatura. We know that advocatura have been always passive in Uzbekistan. I think this is something that Uzbekistan inherited from the Soviet period. There's no respect for defense lawyers, and children or law students do not wish to be defense lawyers. They all want to be prosecutors. But the past 25 years of the advocatura's independence was particularly restricted. I think to carry out such ambitious reforms that Mirziyoyev is suggesting, advocatura must be strengthened. It should be free from restrictions, government meddling into the affairs, and they should be empowered. I'll talk about some of the new things that happened last 1.5 months. Mirziyoyev signed the law on militia, that's police. For 25 years, Uzbekistan did not have a law on militia, and their activities were not regulated by law. And police today is acting the same way as they used to act before, 1 month before. It's hard to predict what will happen, what will change in practice, but at least having the law is, I think, something big. And Tashkent city registration system, which is Propiska law, has been eased a little bit. Now employees of the state bodies can obtain permanent residence in Tashkent city and region. I think Propiska law is in violation of the constitutional principle of freedom of movement in Uzbekistan. It should be abolished at all. But having seen this small step of change for better easiness, I think it might be a sign of bigger reform in the future, that they should be abolished at all. And there's a draft law on combating corruption passed in the legislative chamber. It's not law yet, but it is also, again, big effort showing that they do care about corruption. And also a resolution on amnesty in connection with the anniversary of Constitution of Uzbekistan was passed in October, in the beginning of October. Usually, an amnesty law for the Constitution they used to announce it in month of December because the constitutional day is in December. But this year it was announced earlier. If you look at the text of the law, there's no big change. There's no change at all, I think. But then who fall under the amnesty law, we don't know. Because I think this law will be a test for the new regime to see if they really are trying to engage and bring reforms, especially in terms of political prisoners and religious prisoners. Because we know in practice those who are convicted with religious prisoners or political prisoners, they're usually convicted with different crimes on paper. These are mostly like human trafficking or dealing or possession of drugs and others. So whether they will be amnestied or not, it's hard to say it right now, but I think it will, we'll see it when the law is executed in a few months. If these political and religious prisoners are released, and I think that it will be a great gesture that the new government does not approve Karim's regime. And there's another dilemma with this amnesty. If prisoners are amnestied, they are forgiven. That means they're still considered as convicts, criminals, but the government has forgave them. If political and religious prisoners are amnestied, the government message to them will be, okay, we forgive you, but you are still criminal, and the previous government was not wrong in convicting you. If they are acquitted, on the other hand, then that means that previous government was wrong in imprisoning them. The new government does not agree with Karim's regime. When prisoners are acquitted, they are rehabilitated and compensations must be paid by the state. Considering the large number of prisoners of conscience in the country, I think it seems far happening in the near future. In the amnesty law, there's a paragraph for prisoners convicted for the first time with a crime of joining the banned organization and involvement in activities against peace and public order. If they are in the direction of recovery, they can fall under the amnesty law. The new government also established a center on fight against terrorism and extremism in Tashkent police. It is reported that the center will study psychology of convicts in terrorism and extremism-related crimes to understand the ways they have become terrorists and extremists, and fight with these issues in a preventative way. They say the center is a sign that the way the government used to fight with terrorism will change, and the center will work with religious prisoners who will be released soon, probably under the amnesty law. Of course, these things give a little hope, but my general conclusion, observations show that in the freedom of religion area, and especially with prisoners with religiously related crimes, will not change. The policies in this area will not change and remain the same. Lack of transparency and corruption is also needs to be dealt urgently. Prime Minister opened a virtual cabinet where citizens can send their appeals online or by the phone. And this is a huge thing in Uzbekistan among Uzbek people. There's thousands of appeals within a month, and Mirziyoyev is solving their problems. But what kind of problems they are? If you look at these problems, for example, one person says, I cannot withdraw cash from my bank account, and he appeals to the Prime Minister, and Mirziyoyev helps him to withdraw cash from his bank account. There are the smallest problems that a bank worker or director of school or head of mahalla could have solved and should have solved. And the need for people to appeal the president with such pretty things is a sign of bigger problem in the country. And the problem is that with institutions, that institutions are not working. Rule of law is not there, and the government is not serving the people. In fact, Mirziyoyev stated himself that government is not serving the people, and everyone knew it. This was happening for 25 years. Everyone knew it, but no one could talk about it, because Mirziyoyev said it. Now on the media, everyone's saying government is not serving people. the virtual cabinet was good in two terms. First of all, even with petty things, smallest issues, people are resolving the issues. Second, it shows the real situation in Uzbekistan like a mirror to everyone, both the government officials and to the lay people. Now people can see and talk about it, openly say this, and of course they knew that the difficulties they were facing before, but the constant media propaganda that everything is perfect in the country is not matching with the scene in the virtual cabinet. It will not. I think it will not last long because it cannot continue like this. So I'll jump into my conclusions. My conclusions are that it is transition period and it's difficult to predict how the new government turn to. Legal reforms, economic reforms that Mirziyoyev announcing can only be tested after the elections and after the execution and implementation of these reforms. I think that will take at least 1 or 2 years to see. If he's really well intended, these reforms and changes will not remain on the paper only and will bring quality change. We also have to pay attention that Uzbekistan was in a vacuum for 25 years. Even a leader with good intention wants to change, bring democratic, dramatic changes, it will not be possible until he changes the institutions, people's minds and intellectual minds. For example, forced labor is still in force in this season. Many people are mobilized, but let's say if he is against forced labor, just imagine, he cannot stop it today because it's not ready, the field is not ready, there are no machines to pick the cotton. I think it will at least require 2 or 3 years to get things ready. And about the last thing I wanted to add is there's some news that human rights activist, member of human rights organization Izgolik, Murat Razakov, was released from prison a few years ago and earlier than his term. Just today there are reports from eltuz.com saying that Samandar Pokonov, the longest serving in prison political prisoner, is released, although this is not confirmed yet. If he's released, this will be 23 years and 4 months of his term. And if the news is confirmed, I think it's a good sign of regime that is different than Karimov's regime. And my recommendations for the new government would be 4 points. To work on establishing respect for the rule of law, making the judicial system independent, strengthening the institution of advocatura, fighting corruption, and working on transparency of the government. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dillorom.